1942.
No matter how long it may take us.
America has just declared war on Japan after the horrible attack at Pearl Harbor, and you, the new captain of the ship, the USS Drum, a submarine, are now in the South Pacific. You clamber through the ship past all the sharp edges and the tubings and the meters to get to the tower of the sub. An enemy ship has been sighted. You don't know the ship's name, but you know from the Japanese lettering that your sub is pointed in the right direction. The Mizuho will become one of the first Japanese subs sunk by American forces in this war if you have anything to do with it. You order the fellows in the torpedo rooms to load and ready their weapons. The Drum slithers towards the Mizuho slowly and carefully, staying below the waves as best it can. The Pacific Ocean's heat keeps everybody warm, and everything is telling you to pay attention to the sweaty dudes, all 80 of them, that are trapped inside the USS Drum, but you know better. You know you have to fight and fire at this ship right now. From 1,000 yards away, the torpedo leaves its tube and heads towards its destination, the Mizuho. 35 seconds later, you hear an explosion. A chill goes through your body. You launch another torpedo before the cue to leave. A Japanese destroyer escort speeding toward you starts heart palpitations. You dive, and then you sit and wait. Above you, Japanese destroyers drop depth charge after depth charge after depth charge as they try to blow you and your crew to Kingdom Come. And after a 22-hour ordeal, you finally made it. You shoot back up to the surface and begin your search for your next prey. This is the story of the USS Drum, and it's the next subject of our next Emerald Coast day trip video. But a couple of notes. First, you won't have to go 10,000 miles across the world to find this thing or look into a Navy junkyard to find it. It's actually just a couple of hours away in the Mobile Bay. After a drive through Pensacola and over the state line into Alabama, we crest a bridge from the eastern shore to Mobile County, and you can see the massive Battleship Alabama. We'll check her out too today at the USS Alabama Battleship Memorial Park. Okay, so we've just made it to the Battleship Memorial Park. It's a place that I've been coming to since I was a little kid, and I just love it because, hey, battleship. Over there is the Drum. That's the submarine that was used in World War II, and then we have a ton of different planes here to check out, so let's go. A wide assortment of vintage World War II planes and Korean War planes are stowed away in this hangar along with some other newer aircraft. If you inspect a couple of the planes, you'll notice that the docents have quite the sense of humor. After a quick look around the hangar to see the various aircraft, vehicles, memorabilia, and informative little plaques, don't miss the plaques, we head out to the USS Drum site in the park. Before we get on this ship, you need to know it's pretty cramped. And if you're living in a pretty cramped living situation, either with your parents or because you've had another kid and you need a bigger home, anything like that, you need to speak with Cindy Zimmerman. She is the expert local realtor all along the Emerald Coast. You can get with her at cindyzsellshomes.com or the information right down here below. She is an amazing realtor, and I highly recommend her. Now back to the video. The first thing you'll notice is that the Drum is no longer in the water. Back in the 90s, when everything was way more awesome, the Drum was in the water, but then Hurricane Katrina came through in 2005 and lifted and rolled the sub, but hey, it still couldn't destroy her. As I walk to the ship, we pass two memorials in granite, one that honors the many submariners who died in the Second World War, and another that honors Howard Walter Gilmore for his Medal of Honor citation. Then I start toward the Drum, named after the fish of the same name. As a matter of fact, all of the submarines in the Gato class are named after fish. The ship would get laid down or started in September of 1940 and would be commissioned just a month before the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor that moved the United States into the fight with Japan. As I get to the Drum, I immediately realize that there are men dressed in Navy uniforms. They're just from the 1940s. They're a group of reenactors who come out once a quarter to do living history demonstrations. So it was pretty much dumb luck that we're gonna get a ton of extra history knowledge, but hey, sometimes you just come out ahead. When we walked on board, the first member of the troop gave us the basics about sub life.
On this boat at one time and only 2 toilets. It's the little stuff. You know, not 2 bathrooms, no, 2 toilets. One for officers, one for enlisted.
Just as a side note, I can only imagine with 75 guys and 75 digestive systems, that thing was in constant use.
Guys are sharing one toilet. Is that, how did
It wasn't very good. And I like to say that to a lot of the people.
The mission determined how long the subs were at sea. They could be out for months at a time with 2 toilets and 2 showers. Again, for 80 men, I don't think that gets pointed out enough. Though we should say they had it better than their counterparts in the Imperial Japanese Navy. After all, the Japanese didn't even have a flush toilet. And compared to subs nowadays, which can pretty much stay underwater forever, these submarines in the 1940s were a lot more limited on their range and what they could do.
They were limited by their food and their water. See, these subs didn't make their own water like modern subs do. They only had enough drinking water in storage. That's why they didn't take showers and shave like that. They were allowed to grow beards, and they call them pig boobs, because you didn't use your drinking water to bathe.
As I turn around to look at the rest of the ship, I see something that, at least to me, isn't super out of the ordinary. But that tower is what makes the Drum unique. On November 22nd, on its 8th war patrol, the Drum survived 3 separate depth charge attacks after it attacked a shipping convoy and received significant damage to its tower. They initially took it to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii to get it repaired, but they couldn't fix it there, so they had to take it all the way back to Southern California to get those repairs done correctly. If that conning tower had gone, it probably would have killed all 80 men on board. A total of 31 depth charges were laid out by the Japanese, who were trying to kill everybody on this sub, but they were able to get away with just a little bit of damage. A total of 31 depth charges were used on this ship by the Japanese, who were trying to destroy it, but of course the American sailors got away from what must have been a terrifying experience. But the tower had to be replaced, meaning that the Drum got the newest type of tower from a newer class of submarine. It was a Vallejo-class tower, making it the only submarine in the fleet with a Gato-class body and a Vallejo-class tower. The commander of the submarine, future Admiral, but then Commander D.F. Williamson, would captain the ship all the way back to the West Coast to make that refit. He'd get the ship back into action for the 9th of 14 war patrols. In total, the Drum would sink 15 ships, or as the Navy likes to calculate it, 80,580 tons of shipping before the war ended in 1945.
So here I am on the deck of the USS Drum. It's a little bit windy today, so sorry about that, but you can see the 3 main weapons that the Drum used on this 311-foot boat that had a crew of about 80 typically. Had its 20 and its 40 millimeter guns that were on top of the boat, and then it has all of its torpedo tubes that are way down in there that were used, of course, to attack Japanese shipping. So we are here at the entrance to get inside the ship. This is the biggest room in here. So let's go check it out.
I descend down into the largest room on the entire ship, the forward torpedo room, and as you might have guessed, it's where they held the torpedoes that shot out the front of the ship. The Drum had a total of 5 torpedo tubes that could be used to sink enemy shipping on the front of the ship and another 5 on the back of the ship. In addition to those torpedoes, the room also bunked 15 enlisted men. From there, we scoot past a couple of people and again, the most oversized room on the ship, and into the next room. On the right is the kitchen area. Across from there is the officer's stateroom, which is separated from the rest of the ship by a curtain. There were 2 officers assigned to a bunk at any given time, though due to watch schedules, it meant 3 or 4 men would call that room home. Heading down further into the ship, you'd find another enlisted man's quarters.
So to give an idea how tight the quarters are in here. This is where a guy would sleep. Right here. Pretty tight.
In the next room, I come across another reenactor who tells me a little bit more about life on the sub.
And I mean, they would do just the usual things: play cards, play checkers, shoot the breeze, just whatever. But usually, you were pretty busy. You didn't have a lot of time to think about it. You did. They did 4-hour watches, and so one of the things that they used to say was, you had a third of the crew asleep, a third of the crew on duty, and a third of the crew in the way.
Okay. There was absolutely no privacy in any way, shape, or form on this ship, and enlisted men, 3 of them, would share 2 bunks. Above this space is the conning tower. Up to 11 people would get crammed in there when the ship prepared to attack, as it had access to the periscope, torpedo firing system, and other important systems. And remember, this was a part of the ship that nearly split off during that depth charge attack by the Japanese. To ensure the sub could communicate with the outside world and receive orders and other communications, the engineers designed a radio area in the middle of the sub. While they still use the radio down here to give people an idea of what radio traffic on the ship would sound like, my favorite part of this room is the air conditioning unit they installed to keep tourists cool during the summer. After all, this is an enclosed metal capsule roasting on the Gulf Coast in the middle of the summer, and it doesn't even have the water to cool it down. I passed by the crew's shower and the engine room as I moved farther astern. Did I use that right?
It's amazing how small everything is here in the USS Drum. This is like the whole engine compartment, so all the power plant for the submarine is right here. And to get through every single thing, you have to go through one of these. And they're like halfway big, halfway small, so if you're taller than like 5'7", it's really difficult to get through this stuff. So I imagine being small would really help. These submarines are really kind of like the short man's revenge of the Navy.
The Drum still has all the assorted switches and knobs that it had on it back in the day, even though it was decommissioned right after the war in 1946. The Navy did reverse that decision a year later and dragged it out to Washington, D.C. There, the members of the Naval Reserve used her for training exercises until 1967, when she joined the inactive fleet for 2 years before being transferred over to the Battleship Alabama Memorial Park, where it rests today.
This is the other engine room here in the USS Drum. It's got all the knobs and switches and stuff like that to show people what it was like to be on a diesel electric sub in World War II. This thing is probably the biggest room that you can walk around in the submarine, but if you go back that way, there's more beds and stuff like that, but there's just not a whole lot of space here, and so I don't imagine it would have been a whole lot of fun, especially without air conditioning, which this boat now has. The HVAC is in the next room.
Keep crawling through yet another porthole near the back or the stern of the ship and notice a dark part of the sub's mechanics.
In case the worst happened, you'd have one of these doors that are heavily sealed. Pop this over, and then you latch that one closed and seal a part of the ship off. Kind of a last resort measure in case depth charges or something took out part of the boat.
Finally, I get to the very rear of the ship. That's where more sleeping quarters and weapons are. This is actually one of the most dangerous parts of the ship during combat due to what they kept in there and the mechanics and physics behind World War II subs.
And here we are at the back of the boat, where if you had a bunk here, you had the pleasure of sleeping next to high explosives, so that they could, I guess, take out other boats and shipping as they needed, but still kind of uncomfortable, right? Right? I'm not crazy.
I take the ladder back to the surface, the light greets me, and the Alabama awaits. It's a quick walk from the Drum through the hangar again to the Alabama site. You walk up a massive gangplank to another reenactor in an officer's uniform, and from the air you can see how much bigger this ship is than the USS Drum. The Drum was 311 feet long and displaced approximately 1,500 tons on the surface and had an 80-person crew, give or take a guy. The Alabama, meanwhile, is almost 700 feet long, weighs almost 40,000 tons, and had a total crew of 2,500 people. It was the last of the 4 Iowa-class battleships that were built and entered service in August of 1942 after a 3-year construction and testing period.
So even though this battleship was really built to take on other battleships, the age of the battleship had really ended by the time World War II got its start. And so this boat, this ship, was basically used for 2 things. Thing number 1, protecting aircraft carriers out in the Pacific. Thing number 2, shelling the crap out of the Japanese. And they did that with these 16-inch guns right here, as well as their assortment of smaller guns that were up here on the forecastle. The most important part of this ship to the military really was the radar that it had on board, because it gave the aircraft carriers enough time to marshal their own aircraft to protect the fleet when the Japanese came a-calling.
And both the guns and anti-aircraft platforms got a lot of work during the Second World War. It participated in a couple of dozen operations throughout the theater of war, from the bombardment of the small island of Nauru in the South Pacific to steaming into Tokyo Harbor to accept the surrender of the Japanese military in 1945. The Mighty A would launch more than 1,250 16-inch cells at the Japanese and shoot down 22 enemy aircraft. So although it would not have ship-to-ship combat its engineers designed it for, the vessel would still put in work, son. The Alabama would start the Second World War on the other side of the world in frigid seas in the north of the United Kingdom. The battleship would escort transports along with the British Home Fleet, which brought surprise to the United States allies in the Soviet Union in 1942. The Soviets fought the Battle of Stalingrad and other key engagements to help defeat the Germans. In 1943, the Navy transferred the Alabama from the Atlantic to the Pacific so that it could start beating up on the Japanese. And it stayed busy. Here you can see all of the ship's engagements, mostly shore bombardments and carrier escort duty for the rest of the war.
To give you an idea how big these 16-inch cannons are, I'm standing in the shadow of one right now, and it's about to get real bright on me. So these 16-inch cannons were just monstrous. They could lob a shell that I'm about to show you 4 miles within 3 feet of its intended target. Look at this thing, 2,700 pounds of hate coming down at you from 4 miles away, accurate to within 3 feet. This battleship's amazing. It's pretty incredible.
I headed inside the ship where I met Norris, a former Navy man himself and huge USS Alabama enthusiast. He's a tour guide on the ship, and although his time was after the Second World War, he holds the ship in great reverence. After the war, the Navy toyed with the idea of turning the Alabama into some sort of like missile launch cruiser, but ultimately decided, at least the accountants decided, that it wouldn't be cost effective to use it in that way. So in 1962, the same accountants that decided, no missile cruiser, said it's time to send it to the scrapyard. Norris explained to me how that felt to an entire state that had its name on the side of the ship.
I'm gonna set your ship on the thing. They be telling you everything you've done in your life. Doesn't mean anything.
It did look like it was going to get cut up, and that's until virulent racist and former Alabama governor George Wallace decided to step in and do like the one good thing ever that he did. He started a fundraising campaign to preserve the USS Alabama in perpetuity. Kids brought in their nickels and dimes to raise money to purchase the Alabama and have it towed to Mobile Bay to create a museum for the ship.
It's a ship, yes, a steel ship. Accurate, but basically it's what they did for you and me.
Kids raised about $125,000 from nickels and dimes to save the ship. The other $675,000 came from corporate donations. Nowadays, the park itself is a self-funded state agency, so it doesn't receive any subsidy from the state, but the state governs it. According to the Encyclopedia of Alabama, the Alabama requires about $1 million worth of maintenance every year, and it employs 35 people full-time to take care of the entire museum. The trade-off's pretty good economically. According to the Encyclopedia of Alabama, $500 million in revenue has been generated in the last 50 years, which is roughly $10 million a year, so that more than covers the maintenance costs. Nowadays, inside the ship, there are numerous museum exhibits about life on the USS Alabama. They also have displays of the ordnance fired from the cannons on the top deck, a short video about the USS Alabama's combat exploits, and a cafeteria room featuring the USS Alabama's silver dining set. The lower you go on the ship, the more lost you get. Portholes after portholes continue throughout the ship, but you can wander for a while, thanks to a later invention that we already saw on the Drum.
Britain here, thanks to these HVACs like the ones they have on the USS Drum too now, but it wasn't always like that, especially in the Pacific in the 1940s. There was no air conditioning, and this is all metal, so it was a lot like being broiled alive for the most part for, I don't know, a better part of 2 years, but still a really beautiful ship.
As we dive deeper onto the ship, the more you realize it's kind of like a small town. Offices, a butcher shop, a cafeteria complete with dessert, even a jail complete with a rakish Navy man motto, "You dog." Go down another deck and there are dozens of cots, a huge dormitory for the sailors on the ship that are stacked 3 deep, and yeah, there's more jail cells down here. I'm not sure why they were prepared for so much crime and delinquency on board, but dadgum were they.
The other thing that's kind of crazy is if you listen really carefully, you can hear how much noise people make on this ship without even meaning to. It's really just very close quarters. Not as bad as the submarine next door, but still pretty tight.
Despite the tight quarters and the fact that the museum has been here for more than 50 years, plenty of people still come through here every year, more than 325,000 in 2023. If we assume that half are kids, then the gate revenues brought in almost $4 million, not to mention the money that they make from parking in the gift store, where you can buy all this Alabama-themed merch. They've added an airplane hangar, of course, in addition to the air park outside, which is the home to a variety of aircraft, including this SR-71 Blackbird that can outrun Soviet surface-to-air missiles. The two ships together make an amazing historical day trip that stands the test of time, Japanese weaponry, and Gulf Coast hurricanes.
Well, I certainly hope that you enjoyed my trip aboard the Mighty A, and check out some of our other videos. This is what I'm filming today, but we'll be out at various points in the near future. So for Mid-Bay News, I'm Christopher Zoll.